The base for this build was one of the huge mutants holding up the Chaos War Shrine in Age of Sigmar. It's a lesser used model and one you don't see converted a lot, so of course I decided on doing the most difficult thing and turning him into an Adeptus Mechanicus Tech Priest. One of the things I love about Tech Priests is the way their red robes cover the bizarre shapes of what their transhuman bodies have become. And so I thought starting with a model who already had a weird silhouette and then making green stuff robes over it would be a good way of achieving that. The first thing I did was dry fit some heads onto the model to get an idea for his personality. Though the original mutant has 3 heads, my Tech Priest was only going to have 1, and the one I settled on was this one from the Dominus kit. I've always really liked it, and it's the only one of sufficient size that wouldn't look silly on his bulk. On the back of the mutant, there's a flat cut where the War Shrine is supposed to lock in. I decided to repurpose it by slotting in a bit of cable to make it look like it was bursting out from beneath his skin. The ends don't fit perfect, but could be milliputted later. I next tried to add a bunch of cables to his neck, which was a mistake because I later just cut them all off and went for a different approach entirely. I also tried fitting on this power box to his chest to make it seem like it was plugged right into him. The trick to Tech Priests and Mechanics models is that they look like they're completely wearing robes, but actually their top half is either covered in armor or machinery of some kind. This power box I would have taken off and then put back in place after sculpting some green stuff robes beneath, but I eventually ended up discarding the idea as the build went on. With those first touches done, I decided to start thinking about what I wanted to do with our Tech Priest's left arm. There were a few key places it could go that would all have taken the model in very different directions. The plasma cannon would have turned him into a heavy weapons platform, the drill given him a savage edge, and the tech axe would have just looked awkward and stupid. For his right side, I wanted to keep as much of the spindly 3-armed look as I could, so even once I cut off the one going straight up, I replaced it with this gun from a Dominus kit. Back on his left arm, I decided on using none of the options I tried in dry fitting, and instead lopped off his arm below the elbow so I could attach this Cataphrone claw. Ultimately, the idea I liked most for him was to have it holding this tech axe, from a Myrmidian by the way, like he was leaning on it to support his weight, which I felt like matched his pose and reinforced the idea of Tech Priests as biological husks. To enhance that idea even further, I cut through his waist and lengthened it with a few layers of plastic heart so his dimensions would be stretched and look slightly wrong. It also made him taller, which I really like as I'd begun to think of him as this monstrous, towering Tech Priest. I switched back to his left arm and decided to try and see if I could combine his original arm with some tubing to make an enormous cane for him. This worked okay, but not great. It did help me cement, though, a new direction I wanted to take my Tech Priest. I'd originally been thinking of him as this red-robed priest of Mars, huge and wheezing and also cultured, something out of an old sci-fi novel. But in the back of my mind, a different concept had been percolating, of a kind of pilgrim magos biologus that walks barefoot over far-flung Xenos worlds stripped to the waist. Strange flesh barred to the elements, secure in his faith in the Omnissiah as he studies the mysteries of weak flesh. To match that vision, I replaced the cane with a Deathwing Terminator's flail on a pole. It gives him a slightly flagellant look, which fit much better than the tech axe I had been planning on using. While I liked the idea of keeping his back bare, I did want to add a Mechanicus edge by having cables blistering out from beneath his skin. I achieved that by cutting grooves in him and then gluing in guitar wire and various spare cables for my bits box. To give him a robe stripped to the waist, I flattened out some green stuff, wrapped it around him, and then started tearing at it to give it a ragged and wind-torn look. It didn't quite look like a robe, but was still pretty good for my first foray into green stuff cloth. I cut out a section of the robe on his lower back and glued in place a Skitarii power pack. On either side of the pack, I attached green stuff castings I'd made of some Myrmidon armor plates. To the front of his robe, I fit in mechanical dangly bits. For the little vestigial arm on the right, I snipped it off below the elbow and replaced it with a Ruststalker cord claw. It gives him an edge and intelligence to counteract his size. Finally, I glued in place guitar wire to his collarbone. And with that, my Magos Biologist was done. I'm really pleased with how he turned out, the way he looks like he's trudging forward across some windswept world, mutant and Magos and iron-willed. At some point, I'm gonna have to make him some accompanying Skitarii with the same design language and theme. If you're interested in seeing that, hit the subscribe button or check out some of the other AdMech conversions I've done. Thanks for watching.